Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your host, Mike.
And I'm your host, Alex.
And today we are doing a creator spotlight or /0 episode for our upcoming book, The Nightly News. And this one is the most straightforward we've ever done for a 0 episode.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of a one shot.
The next closest would be Jeff Lemire, but even then, he had a letterer.
He had a letterer, Steve Wands. Yeah, here we just have Jonathan Hickman, who is writer, artist, inker, colorist, letterer, designer, everything. You know, the book just says the Nightly News by Jonathan Hickman, and that's as succinct as it gets because he handles all of it. So yeah, it's rare to find a book like this even now. It's rare to find a book that is done all by one person. It's I guess what I'll say is it's notable when it happens now because it is so rare. You know, when you get a book where one creator is involved for everything, and they handle all aspects of the comic and the storytelling, that it's worth celebrating and pointing out.
Yeah. So where I think we're going to get more into like the specifics of Jonathan Hickman's art and direction and choices and writing when we do it, you know, for the Nightly News here. But in broad strokes, I have not read, his biggest titles come to mind are Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four. I think the average comic shop goer knows the name Jonathan Hickman from those titles, even though I've never picked up and read any of them. I think I've gotten like Free Comic Day Avengers and Jonathan Hickman wrote it. And, you know, and I read that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Talk about his style, his characteristics. I guess even his origin in comics, but we're about to read the first thing he ever did. It's strange to me that someone has the bravado to go in to a place like Image and say, I'm the writer, I'm the penciler, I'm the inker, I'm the colorer, you know, I'm doing graphic design, I'm doing infographics, I'm writing the story, the dialogue, and everything. Normally you kind of get a start, you know, some other writer takes you under their wing and they're like, yeah, you know, I'll give you a writing credit on this issue, or, you know, you do the lettering for me here, and then your name's on a book, or, you know, you do the art, something. You find some collaboration, but this guy just goes in right away on his own.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's maybe because he came to the industry a little later in life, like he had another career beforehand before transitioning into this, but yeah, he walks into Image essentially with two books. This book was the first to actually be published, which started in November 2006, and it 6 issues, but it ran to June 2007, meaning there was some delays on the back end there, which is foreshadowing of Hickman's entire career right there. But it was this book, The Nightly News, and another book that he also wrote, drew, colored, penciled, lettered, everything, called Pax Romana, which came out maybe only the first issue maybe came out a month or two after the first issue of Nightly News. So he had 2 books out basically at the same time at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007 with Image, that he was everything on, writer, artist, everything on. And that's how we got his start. You know, from there, has a couple more Image books, but then in 2009-ish is when he starts really writing at Marvel. So only a couple years after he comes onto the scene at Image, he is brought on at Marvel, and I'm assuming he was Marvel exclusive all those times because he starts getting into just kind of the Marvel machine, and very quickly becomes one of their biggest, most important writers. He's the person that takes on, that comes onto a title, not so much reboots it, but maybe in a way kind of soft reboots it, restarts it. And that title then eventually becomes the focus of the Marvel universe, of Marvel Publishing for the time he's writing it. You know, he comes in with the big ideas, the big swings. And so that starts very shortly after he even gets into comics at all, which is really kind of really wild to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of many other people that both have that kind of meteoric rise and that kind of, you know, when they start doing something, everyone else moves around what they're doing.
Yeah, it
maybe
is
Jason
interesting. Yeah.
Aaron,
Well, I think
although
the other guys were like, some specifically at Marvel, some of the guys who wrote that way, Jason Aaron, Brian Michael Bendis, but those guys came up through Marvel. They were brought along that way,
right,
and they obviously they had done creator owned stuff, and they had done some independent stuff on their own to make their name, but Bendis was brought on it, in the early aughts, late 90s, early aughts, right after Marvel had declared bankruptcy. And he talks about how he was writing stuff there as they were wheeling out filing cabinets because they were selling off office equipment. And there was a thought that they would be writing the last Marvel scripts ever. So he was brought up in this time when there was nothing there. And so he was given a lot of opportunity because Marvel had literally nothing to lose. So, he's there and he's built up and he has time to grow, and really work his stories and build up to the name he became. Well, again, a guy like Hickman, the Nightly News is a crazy comic from a stylistic standpoint, a story standpoint, a layout standpoint. There's so many crazy things going on there. And for this to be this man's first published work, to walk in and to have the kind of the audacity to try and break what we think sequential art storytelling is, what comic storytelling is, and walk in with this day one and be like, this is what I'm going to publish. And for Image to do that is really, really crazy and really wild. And so I think that, there had to be something there. People in the industry reading this, seeing him, talking to him, seeing that he's just maybe a big idea guy, sees these really huge stories and how they all work together. And I think that helped his rise when he got to Marvel. They saw that he could take stories in directions that kind of necessitate that everything else sort of kind of has to gravitate around it.
Right.
They saw that he had that kind of presence in his stories.
Yeah, it's a rare combo that I think I'm trying to think if this is a good example. You can set me straight if you don't think it is, but you have to be someone who can, like a Stan Lee, who can have an eye for, the product line, everything else going on, but still care enough about each individual story, each individual issue. And, I think the interesting thing that's happened a lot is a lot of people who end up running these studios were great comic creators, but they're not really good at running a studio. They don't know how to release the product line and, everything else. You kind of took them off what they're good at doing. It's like the Peter principle, and they're just not equipped to do the next level thing of managing all of the stories, all of the talent.
Yeah. And I don't think Hickman would be good as in the role of publisher or editor in chief or something like that. I think
not unless he still gets to write, which
I think that's where his strength is there, in terms of, I'm going to come in with the big idea. Here's the story. Here's what I want to do with these characters. And then, at least in terms of what he had done most recently, was then bring in a room of other writers in the world, because when he was writing Fantastic Four, which became FF, and then New Avengers and the New Avengers, there wasn't a Fantastic Four office, there wasn't an Avengers office. When he came back to Marvel after a few years and was in charge of the X office, he was in charge of resetting the world. And then he had, a half dozen other writers and creators and all that to then work with and bounce ideas off of, to expand all these different titles, which is something that I don't think he had done before at Marvel. But again, he was still integral in writing those initial stories. And he has, he wrote the main miniseries that kicked off the line, House of X and Powers of 10. He wrote X-Men, and he was co-writer initially on, I think, New Mutants and maybe one other book there, just to kind of start off with, to help set and establish the line to get it going. So yeah, he works well in the big story way, the big universe building story way. But yeah, I think he has to be involved. He has to be a writer. because I think the way he works and some of the stories you hear about working with him, I guess he can wear on people. He can be a little tedious. He tends to work, I guess, very hard, very fast. He burns out very fast. I made the comment before about how this first book, The Nightly News, it's 6 issues, but the first 4 issues came out monthly, and then there was like a 2-month gap between the next. It was every other month to finish off because, and not that it's easy to do. This is the book he's writing, drawing, and coloring, and doing all that. But even the books that he was just scripting, he tended to be on the late side, to be on the slow side, to the point where I know he's self-aware of it, because when it was announced that he was taking over the X-Men line in 2019, and that it was starting with these 2 miniseries, House of X and Powers of 10, 6-issue miniseries each, but effectively one 12-issue miniseries, and it was coming out weekly. And that the weekly part was like, wait, Hickman can't do a weekly book. He's like, no, I don't care. That's not going to happen. And I remember him making some joke of like, yeah, how his editors at Marvel already had a gun to his head to make sure that he would get things in on time. So like he's aware of the idea that he tends to be on the slow side and
someone
all
like
that
though.
Yeah.
That's on Marvel for setting him up for a weekly. It's I would have 11 of them in hand before I release number 1.
And so that's the thing. They hit the weekly mark. They didn't miss it. The books came out, but it's still, if you had been familiar with his work, just the idea of Hickman and like deadlines and being on time, that gave you pause, because history shows that it's not going to happen. There are going to be delays.
Right.
But when the work comes in, it's usually pretty great. But so, there tends to be an idea, I guess, again, he does tend to maybe grade on people. It's not the easiest person maybe to work with. And, it's like he comes in, works on like Fantastic Four for a while, and then takes a break, and then comes back and works on Avengers, and then, takes a break. And the same thing happened with the X-Men. He came in and reshuffled all the X-Men stuff, and he was there for 2 years, and then kind of abruptly, like, he's leaving the X-Office, leaving Marvel. And people are like, oh, and people who didn't like the relaunch were like, oh, see, this is they're going to correct it, they're going to change it, they're going to go back to the way it was. And then that definitely didn't happen. They kept going, and the X-Office is still really good. And then they also announced that Jonathan Hickman, along with artist Valerio Schiti, have like a mystery project that's coming out later this year. So like, whatever people say about working with Hickman and how he maybe burns people out, and he grades on whatever it is, they're still working with them, and he's coming back, and they have some project. Literally nothing's been announced about it other than like one tagline teaser, and who it is, and we think it's coming out later. I think there's going to be something in a Free Comic Book Day issue later this year. So like, but no one knows anything about this project other than it's coming from these 2 guys. But Marvel still wants to work with him. They still want to be in business with Jonathan Hickman. So I think he has a proven enough track record that they maybe know that he can be difficult to work with at times, but that the end result is going to be pretty damn good at the end. So
yeah. Okay. So we know the quality of the work pace. Do we want to talk a little bit about recurring themes? And you can really speak to that more than I can. I've got false starts with the Black Monday Murders and Decorum. I own them all. Kind of like started reading it and was like, I'm not really in the mood for this. Pick up something else. And I'm sure I'll circle back to them. But Nightly News is the only thing I've ever read and finished from Hickman.
I think if they're a recurring theme of some of the books I don't know if there's a recurring theme so much throughout some of his Marvel titles, because it's harder to do that along licensed work, for hire work. But when I look at some of his Image titles, his creator-owned titles, starting with the Nightly News, here's just a quick list of some of those: the Nightly News, Pax Romana, Transhuman, A Red Mass from Mars, The Red Wing, The Manhattan Projects, Secret, East of West, The Dying and the Dead, The Black Monday Murders, and Decorum. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's like a dozen titles from from 2006 to 2019, 2020, somewhere in there. A lot of his books that they deal a lot with, I think, with focusing on power and the ruling class and where power lies. And a lot of times, not so much in the nightly news, but in some of his other books, there's maybe like a small genre twist to it. Like maybe we're talking about a little bit of time travel. There's a sci-fi aspect. Maybe we're talking about like not mutants per se in a book like Transhuman, but like, genetic engineering, enhancing human beings.
Sure.
But it's not really about that. It's about our relationship to that sort of thing. He likes to take big swings. Sorry. What I'm trying to say is a lot of his books, a lot of his creator-owned books work far better in terms of here are the themes I want to talk about. Here are the things we're going to discuss. And then maybe some of the character and actual specific plot points get a little jumbled because there's a little less focus on those, whether that's intentional on his part or not. And I think you'll see that in the nightly news. And I think we'll talk about that when we get into the story, that he presents ideas, big ideas, really well. When you're reading this, like, oh, okay, so he's talking about this thing through the lens of this specific story. And then maybe as the story goes through, the focus on the characters and the actual specific plot points, the story points, how the story moves from A, B, C to D. Maybe those don't work quite as well. Maybe those are a little jumbled, but the overall theme, the idea is very clear of what he's trying to comment on, what he wants to focus on, whether it's an idea he agrees with or one he's trying to be critical of. That I think becomes clear in almost all of his books. But I think some of his series, especially some of the smaller kind of maybe like 6-8 issue miniseries, get a little bogged down. He hasn't done really. There are only really like 2, I'd say, long ongoing creator-owned books he's ever done. The Manhattan Projects, which I think was like maybe 25 issues, and then East of West, which I think was like 45 issues. Those are like the longest runs he's done on creator-owned stuff. A lot of other stuff, some of his other stuff was meant to be ongoing, but then it got to issue 7 and then it just stopped. And I'm thinking of the Black Monday Murders, which I think still has 2 issues. Like if you go to any comic release tracking app, I think there are
TBD
2 or 3 issues still listed with just TBA on them. And there he has a number of books that are like that. He has one book that was called, oh God, what was it called? I think it was called Frontier. I think it was solicited, like it was in previews. I think it was going to be 4 issues or whatnot. It was solicited, it was ready to go. All this stuff never came out, and to this day still has never come out, and probably will never come out. And if you go through his bibliography, Hickman's bibliography, I think he's got 3 or 4 like books that are like scripts are done, never released, like unreleased book. It's just, so for whatever reason,
it's so painful for fans.
Yeah. For whatever reason, some of these books either don't come out, or like Black Money Murders, it kind of comes, like that first arc kind of comes to an end. It's been a while since I read it and I haven't reread it. But like, yeah, there were supposed to be more issues, and then this never came. And at this point, like, he's never going to go back to it. Like, I'd be shocked if he goes back to it again. It's been so long and he's moved on from it. So, that like 4-6 issue miniseries is kind of where he lives at this point in terms of his creator-owned stuff. But
yeah, it's almost the flip side of Mark Russell, who had come from another medium and said, I was signed to write 12 issues of Prez, and that's canceled halfway through. He's like, I didn't know that could happen. That doesn't happen to you when you're signed to write a novel, and then you finish writing half of the novel and they just pull the plug on it. It cuts both ways. That hurts for creators. It also cuts the other way for fans, where you're like, I've invested $4 per issue for 20 some odd issues and have
or
hundreds of dollars invested in this, and now you've stopped.
Yeah, I said even just 7 with the idea that it's supposed to go on and the story just ends, even if it's an investment like that. And yeah, it's I don't know. It's
yeah, I mean, and these are people I like. I'm not like I felt like Royal City stopped short, 14 issues or whatever. Even though they did technically end it. I know the one that I've brought up a bunch of times. It seems inevitable that we will eventually do Morning Glories.
Oh yeah, it comes up. My brother has mentioned that we seem to mention it every episode.
Yeah,
and he's not wrong.
It was just one that I read well after it was printed. I did not know that it didn't end, and I went through like a 3-day sprint of reading and really getting wrapped up in it, and then I found out like, oh, that's like a to be continued.
You come to the edge of the cliff and you just keep falling.
Yeah, I'm like, but this is volume 10 and it was released in like 2013. Oh no. Yes. It's like the Reddit snippet when you see someone saying like, I just finished Firefly season 1. Yeah. Do you know who's streaming season 2? And they're all like, buddy.
Oh, poor sweet summer child. Yeah. But no, it is. And I think that's what it is something. There's enough of a track record with Hickman and his work that I think it's a fair critique of things that start and never quite finish, or things that take an absurdly long time to come out. Like I think Decorum, which was an interesting book he did with Mike Huddleston. Like at some point, those issues just like, I think it eventually was 8 issues. They all came out. But at some point it was just like, issues come out when they come out. Like it's like,
right.
At least then I think it was like, these issues will come out. They will come out. You just don't know when. While Black Monday Murders was just like, these are probably not coming out anymore, But there's enough of a track record there where you can be skeptical. So yes, when, as I mentioned, when it was announced that he was taking over the X office, I was skeptical. I was like, really? He's coming back? Because like I the last big thing he did at Marvel was Secret Wars, which was, you got to call it Secret Wars 2015, because I think this was technically the 3rd Secret Wars,
right?
That they had done. But and it was huge. It was big. But if I remember correctly, like it took a long time, to the point where like, that was a huge universe defining. I mean, 2 universe defining it. It ended the Ultimate Universe. But yeah, every book tied into Secret Wars, and it got to the point where the main Secret Wars book was delayed and behind, that like other books that were tying into it that were supposed to start up, after Secret Wars was done. Like Secret Wars is a thing that crossover hits every book. The event happens, and then you pick up what's the aftermath. You pick up afterwards, right? On individual titles. Like those titles were coming out before the actual main miniseries had ended yet, because it was delayed. It took forever, And I think part of that may have been on Hickman. Some of that may have been on the artist Desad Rivich, who is amazing artist, but his stuff can take a while. But the end result was the book was delayed. It took a long time to come out, and that has an effect. That has a domino effect, especially when it's the big crossover that affects the entire publishing line. So when it was announced that he was coming back, and after 3 years and almost 4 years at that point, and taking over the X office, now in charge of rebooting this line that had been kind of maligned for the past almost 10 years, I was skeptical, Yeah. I was very skeptical. But he crushed it. And I think the X books right now, as we're going coming up on over 3 years of this now, of this Krakoan era. So not every series has been a hit, but overall the line is incredible, and it's because of the stuff that Hickman brought to them and the stuff that he laid out. So, it's why people still want to work with him. Why Marvel still wants to work with him. They'll put up with maybe some of the other things of, maybe he's a little late or whatnot. I guess as long as you're self-aware enough to build that into the schedule, if you can get ahead enough to not worry about it, to where it's no longer an issue, then you can deal with it. But
that's what a smart editor-in-chief is supposed to do, right?
Well, yeah, and also a group editor. Yeah.
Right. Here's my talent. This is what their traits are.
Yeah.
how do I put a line together knowing some of the stuff might not be on time? Like, how do you pad that, set expectations, and then deliver?
Yeah. So, and I said, I think so. The criticism you hear about Hickman, I think on that level, I think it's 100% deserved, because he just said the history shows us, that he's not going to be the most on time person. Books are going to stop kind of unexpectedly, whether because they're just delayed indefinitely to the point where they just say hell with it and don't bother with it anymore. So, he has that tailing him, but again, the work that does come out for the most part is incredible. And for the most part is super, super strong. Even if the book that we're covering, his first book, The Nightly News, maybe not be the strongest, but I think you see the seeds of what would come afterwards. You can see that this was someone who had something to say. You could see the talent and the ability there. Interesting to me that he didn't continue doing interior artwork.
I think we saw all of the tricks up his sleeve in terms of interior art, and that's not throwing shade at him. It's just saying
maybe so, but if he had kept doing, I mean, we say that, but also I got to, again, your favorite creator is Jeff Lemire.
No, I was like, are you going to say it or am I going to say it?
Yeah,
it's like he's got man, boy, old man,
he
woman,
has his style,
dog.
and that's it. So I just think it's interesting with someone like Hickman that he has these two really strong debut comics, The Nightly News and Pax Romana, where he is Mr. Everything on those. And those give him enough notoriety that he can then move to Marvel and then basically just be a writer and then be in charge of being like Mr. Big Swing.
Right.
Creator, writer, come in, write the big stuff, but only ever a writer. And then when he goes back to continue doing creator owned stuff, he's now working with other people, which I think is helpful. It's always good to have collaborators, but he doesn't ever go back to just writing and drawing his own book. Because again, the comp here is Jeff Lemire, who then, he gets hired at the big two, both DC and Marvel, as a writer. He does creator owned books. A lot of times, just like Hickman here, a lot of creators, they bring the same collaborators with them.
Right.
Multiple titles over and over again, because we like working with them, telling different stories, but you see them and they're a team. But Lemire also still does his own stuff. He still writes and draws his own stuff to tell his own story. And I think it's interesting that Hickman kind of never went back and did that. It also makes me kind of keeps in mind that there are a lot of people we think of in the industry who are just writers, who are also incredibly talented as potentially being artists as well. Now, some of them aren't. I think about the Toms, Tom King and Tom Taylor. Those guys are like, we are writers. We do not do any of this art stuff. And there are plenty of artists.
That being said, I still want a blank cover sketch from Tom King. That's like on my bucket list.
Well, yeah. Yes, because that's
because of how iconically bad it is.
It's a bit now. It's a thing. But like, again, there are people who are writers who are just writers. There are people who are artists who are just artists. But there are plenty of artists who also would love to write, and they get a chance to. And sometimes it's great. You're like, oh, this person is also a very talented writer as well as artist. And then sometimes you give artists control over. They become writers now, and sometimes it's terrible. And it's like, maybe that's why you should be doing art the whole time. But there are also writers who, oh yeah, by the way, they're really great. I don't know if you've ever seen like Scott Snyder. I don't know if he's ever do any interior art, but like if you see him do sketches from conventions or things like that, you're like, oh wow, like this dude can draw pretty well too. Maybe not interior level, storytelling wise, but some of these guys are also, they are really
but he's certainly good enough that I would like something Scott did.
Yeah.
And I think probably helpful creatively to say, hey, Greg Capullo, here's my sketch for what I'm thinking of for this.
Yeah.
Take it and run with it. Whereas Tom King has to dictate everything with words and stick figure.
Yeah.
It's he has to have a high level trust in his artist.
It's a reminder to me that, some of the people that work in the industry are oftentimes more than just what they do. That just because you work as a colorist doesn't mean that's the only thing you do as a colorist. You're probably a pretty good penciler too. You might be a good writer too, for all I know. Can we get those shots for those people? Can you do other things? So, that I would love to see I would love to see Hickman go back and maybe do another fully written, drawn book just to see what it would do now, since he hasn't done one since 2007. His literal first two books were the only ones that he has done in that way. And currently right now he has he has a creator Substack like so many comic creators did. He has one called Three Worlds, Three Moons. It's with two artists, Mike Del Mundo and Mike Huddleston, guys he's worked with before. I don't subscribe to it. I don't know what it is. I don't know if maybe that's a place for him to do like fully creator-owned stuff where he's going to be writing and drawing stuff. I don't know. But again, I just think it's when I see this early work from a guy who has as renowned as Jonathan Hickman is as a writer, that it's a reminder that, oh yeah, some of these guys are really talented across the board, and they show it early on, and then maybe at some point they just kind of get pigeonholed because he had so much success just as a writer.
Right.
This is what you do. You write the big stuff that maybe, or maybe he just didn't want to do it. Maybe it was too much work because, damn, it seems like a lot of work.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of work. It seems like it's tough. So maybe he just didn't want to do it. But I would love to see it. And it's a reminder to me that oftentimes the people who are in these creative spaces making these comics are oftentimes way more than just the thing you might know them for. And then given a chance, sometimes they may just absolutely blow you away with what they can do.
Yeah. Not to play into more of our own tropes, but the person I was thinking of was Aaron Sorkin. Big surprise. But I've heard a lot of interviews with cast, and they said, that, I went to the cast reading. I didn't know who the writer was, didn't know what he looked like, for like the West Wing. And Sorkin insists on doing the script reading for everyone's audition because he wants to dictate, the pace and the delivery and say, like, give them a fair chance to say, this is what it's going to be. Can you keep up with this?
Yeah.
And the woman who played Ainsley Hayes, I can't remember, but she...
Emily Proctor.
Emily Proctor, yeah. So she like leaned across the table to him between takes, and she was like, you're very good at acting. She like thought she was reading with another extra. And he was like, oh, well, thanks. I've got a degree in musical theater. And it's like, also, he's the writer. Yeah, and it's like, well, he probably is a decent actor. And, now we know he's a decent director, but he, for 20 years, was only a writer. Mm-hmm. It didn't mean he didn't have other skills. It just meant,
Well, and also he's probably pretty good at acting his own stuff because it's his stuff. Now, if you give him something else, who knows? But yeah,
there
is the people that are creative are often creative in multiple ways. And like I said, it's a reminder to me to not just pigeonhole and to be less surprised, I guess. Like I think back most recently with some of the recent work past couple of years that were books have been written by Scotty Young. Because you think of Scotty Young, you think of his art style, you think of the covers, and you think of the stuff that, I Hate Fairyland, The Wizard of Oz, stuff that he is cartooning himself all the way through, and just don't think of him as just quote unquote just a writer. And yet the books he's done, like Middle West, The Me You Love in the Dark, his image books to like Strange Academy, he's credited as just as a writer. You're like, oh right, these guys can do more than just the thing you know them for automatically. And so again, to go back to the earlier work of Hickman and to see this, I think it's cool and it's informative, especially if you're familiar with his more recent work now and haven't read a book like this, from his early days, like I am. I only read this book for the first time a couple years ago. How about you? What did you read? How did you find this book?
I found this book at okay, so I like one of my main pastimes is going to used bookstores, and one of my favorite is Friends of the Public Library, which is a warehouse. And I mean, actually I find them in every city I go to now. Like I kind of Google when I get there, I'm like, do they have a Friends of the Public Library here?
I Google comic shops, but okay, for sure.
I do that as well. Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, last time I was in Toronto, I was kind of nosing around, sleuthing, and trying to figure out like which one of these does Jeff go to, and does he like sign stuff and put on the show? I'm like kind of just casually flipping through. Anyway, I found this. I get excited when I go to the Friends of the Public Library. People also donate things, so it wasn't all stickered up from being an ex-library copy.
There we go.
And it cleaner. It was $3, and it was like, okay, Jonathan Hickman, I know that image. probably my most played publisher. I read a lot of indie stuff, but I think I had the highest level of trust in Image. And that may be changing with the rise of Boom or whatever else, but I love Image. I knew the name Jonathan Hickman from all the stuff he said, and I was like, well, I assumed he had started at the big two and then splintered off to do this. I did not know the chronology of it. I didn't know people started this way, which is literally, and I've looked at how to become a writer for Image. If you want to try to start, what you have to do is write a full script, have the story arc mapped out, have an artist signed on with you already who has illustrated at least 5 pages of the book you want, and then submit that. And I'm like, your guys are barely doing anything for me at that point. If I knew an artist that was capable of producing a great book, I wouldn't need a publisher. I was hoping I could write something and submit it. And anyway, so I didn't know people started there. I thought a lot of people did the Lemire thing of you go to Marvel, DC, you get paired up with people, you find the ones you like, and then you run off doing creator and stuff. So anyway, I thought this would be a good introduction to Jonathan Hickman, and it sounds like it actually is.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate introduction to him. Yeah. So anyway, I grabbed it for that a couple years ago. I read it, I think within a month of getting it, and then we were looking for a one shot because we just finished another one shot. We were coming off of 2 Flintstones and a Not All Robots, Mark Russell stint. We did a one shot around Christmas, New Year's, because that was a crazy time schedule wise for both of us. We're setting up to do the Unwritten, which is 12 volumes, which is a really long run. We were like, let's do another one shot. And I was like, let's find a creator that we wouldn't be able to talk about otherwise. Because ostensibly, Hickman is a Marvel guy.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do a big Avengers run or X-Men thing here.
No.
So I was like, so Hickman, this seems like the way to talk about him. And, Decorum is longer.
It's Black a little Monday longer.
Doesn't really end. Yeah.
And listen, the only other book ongoing wise, maybe Decorum. East of West, which
East of West. Yeah.
I think that's I think it ends up being 6-7 trades, something like that. So yeah, there's this is.
Yeah, so I had that inkling. I was like, I think we talked about in the wish list. I was like, there's some Scotty Young stuff we could do. I'm not sure which one's the right one to do with him, but with Hickman, this was not only is this what I have, this is also the only one he's done that is just one complete trade that we can knock out as a one shot.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and I feel really glad to have acquainted myself with Jonathan Hickman, for this podcast. And for rereading this, and even though I'll get into it in the main episode, even reading this a couple years apart, the paneling and page layout is still challenging.
I would agree with that.
I read it twice before podcasting this time, which means it's 3 total. And returning to it after a couple years, I was like, I'm sorry, is this a splash page or is this not? What order do I read these boxes in?
There's a little wonkiness to it, and that's one of the things that I noticed. That I first read this book. I'm sure I got it digitally, probably some sale, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was only because it was on sale. It was Hickman. It was Hickman I hadn't read. I didn't realize when I purchased it that it was I knew it was early Hickman work. I didn't realize at the time it was his first work.
Yeah.
So it was more just, this is something. Oh, I think I saw. I was like, oh wow, this is an early Hickman book that he wrote and drew. That's interesting. It's on sale. I'll buy it. And said what I bought was the anniversary edition, which was released in 2011, like 5-year anniversary, whatever it was. But yeah, I didn't realize it was his first work, and reading it from that one, having read a lot of his Marvel work and a handful of his recent creator-owned work. I hadn't read a lot of his older work. I'd read some spots here and there of some of the stuff he had done for Image. This book really is like everything he does in comics. It's like almost all the bits and pieces, the things he would work with, the things he would try, both in his creator-owned work and at Marvel. You see them all in the nightly news. and they're not all fully formed yet, obviously, because this is like first out of the gate. He's what he's trying to do. But having read more of his stuff first and seeing the kind of things he does in his books, it's then very wild and very interesting to see like base elements of those things in his first comic, like
yes.
I can see,
I mean, all the ingredients are there.
Yeah.
And to me, it feels like if you had like a bunch of meat and vegetables and stuff like that, and you decided to put it all into one really crowded stew, instead of serving it as like, oh, here's the soup and here's the salad and here's an entree. It's like, dump it all in the crock pot.
Yeah. And it's
like,
not that, and it's not that
great.
It still tastes good,
right?
It's clearly like,
but the presentation would have been a lot nicer if you had a 3-course meal instead of one crock pot.
Like this is the first thing you didn't really know how to really work it, and you didn't know how to maximize what you were given, what you have.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. You see some rookie mistakes, or not mistakes, but some like rookie decision making in terms of how he tells and presents the story in the nightly news. That obviously through time and experience he doesn't make down the line. But all those base elements are there. So that was really interesting to come back and read that when I did, after having already experienced some Hickman, to read that first book, to see what his first ideas were for this medium, and to realize that, oh, wait, the stuff he's been talking about this whole time as, things that he was doing from day one. And that's really kind of cool to see.
Well, and the black diagonal lines, I was laughing at it before we recorded because I was looking at a gallery of variant covers he's done for different books.
Yeah.
And you look at what's the furthest place from here, number 2, Wicked and the Divine. I think it was like number 30, something like that. Yeah. They all look like this book.
It's the same. It's the same design.
That he may be growing and as a creator and a writer and everything else, but his art is his art. And there's nothing wrong with that. I can spot, a Lemire cover across the way, the same way I'm Tyler Jenkins or Matt Kinn or anyone, when they do variant covers, I know it's them, Dustin Wynn,
Jenny Frizen, someone
Jenny
like that,
Frizen,
Art Zerm. Yeah. There's a style there, but Hickman's style is less about the art style and it's more about the graphic design.
Yes.
Right. Which is an interesting thing to think about, but it's true. And it makes total sense when you've read a number of his things, not even like all of his things. When you read a number of his books, you see how important he takes that, how important he feels that is. And said he was doing that from day one in his first comic, first issue of his first book. And that carried all the way through the stuff he did when he relaunched the X line in 2019. So it's just, he has his thing, he has his lane, and I think he's sharper focused in that as he went through, but like it's still the same lane,
right?
He hasn't veered off of that.
Yeah, and I think there's like we said, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So I guess the last thing to talk about in the Zero here is there anything someone needs to know before they start reading this? I've got really just one thing.
I really have one thing too, but why don't you?
It might be the same thing.
It might be. Okay.
My thing is, just because something looks like a splash page doesn't mean it is. In almost all cases, you should assume these are single page storytelling.
Even if the art in the background bleeds together.
Right. Yeah. Right. Even when there's art spilling across 2 pages, or, like the big red color or the big blue color is a background that spans both pages, read them as single pages. I think that's going to save you a lot of time and frustration. And I know, because I read it both correctly and incorrectly, it's much more enjoyable to read it correctly. So that's the big one for me. And it's like, that's something that I think you would be navigating for a long time, and you wouldn't really know until you hit the end that, like, oh, there's just kind of has the facade of being splash pages. They're not really splash pages.
There have been times where I've read comics and like maybe I've skipped a page on accident, and you just keep reading through, but it actually takes you a while to realize you don't know what's going on in the story. And sometimes initially I think like, oh God, I'm an idiot, I missed a page. But then I realized, like, wait a minute, why wasn't it more obvious earlier that I didn't know what was going on? And I feel like that's actually a bit of fault of the creatives there, that if the book is not so coherent enough, that if you've read it the wrong way, you may not know initially. And I think that's some of the issues you can see in this book, where if you read some of those pages, the balloons out of order, like it's not too dissimilar that when you read it in the proper order, because some of the stuff is a little esoteric, a little out there. Obviously, it's easier to read in the correct order, but
marginally,
but it is something to be mindful of. The thing I was going to say, that the heads up I would give people who are picking up the nightly news is to really keep in mind when the book was originally published and released. That this is a book that was coming out at the end of 2006 into 2007, because nearly every topic, every issue, every scenario almost is going to feel like it is pulled from a headline you read in the last 3 years. It's going to feel, in the situations will feel incredibly contemporary, even though the things like, 2006 cell phones are ubiquitous, but smartphones aren't,
right. Aside from BlackBerry, but yeah.
Yeah. So the PDA is, I guess you do have that. So like texting devices are there, email devices are there, but the idea of like that smartphones and social media don't exist. A major plot point of the story is cassette tapes, like messages delivered.
Google that. Yeah.
So delivered via cassette tape. So there's some very analog parts of the story, and yet, if you handed this book to someone today, without telling them when it was created, you would forgive them if they thought it was written in the past couple of years, but it was set in the past. So it was like, hey, let's deal with these contemporary issues that we're dealing with today. But if we set it in the recent past, then we eliminate the devices.
Newsroom problem.
Yeah. We eliminate the idea of let's deal with this without smartphones. Let's deal with this without social media. Let's deal with it without 24, all this stuff here. So let's show how we would have dealt with it then. But our eyes are today because it's being written today. This was written in 2016. 2006, 2005, or when it was written. It was written years ago and came out then. So keep that in mind as you read this, because you're gonna see scenarios. You're gonna read dialogue from characters that will 100% feel like, wait, someone wrote this as a reaction to something that happened a year ago, 2 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like you're going to think, oh, this was clearly a reaction to this thing that happened in 2011, or this thing that happened in 2016, or this thing that happened in 2020. You're going to think that this is a direct reference to that, and it's not, because this book predates all of it. So
yeah,
it's something to keep in mind reading it. Yeah,
the illusion of something that was written retroactively.
Yeah,
which is really impressive.
It really is.
And I think it speaks to both what is of a moment and what is evergreen, and he fuses those together in such a way that, like, we'll talk about this, but it really only could have been written in a very narrow window of time when it was written. Otherwise, it would have been
for it to be prescient as opposed to reactionary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it was an incredibly powerful, and it's not the kind of powerful that, like, Underwater Welder, which makes you think, about your own life and personal reflection.
So it's emotional power of that one.
Right.
This one is different.
It's not going to turn you into a crazy cultist, but it's going to poke at your foundation about institutions you inherently trust, or that people at large inherently trust, even if you're, a more cynical person.
That society trusts.
Yes.
Right.
So it's going to poke at the like cornerstones of society, and as such, it's just perfectly genred for what it's doing to your brain.
Yeah.
So I think that's basically all I can say about it without giving something away.
Go pick it up now.
And,
go. Indeed.
Yeah. The library has it. I'm sure your comic shop has it. It's probably accessible in single issue. Like, I don't think they're worth anything special.
I don't know. I think the only issue,
probably a limited print.
That's what I was going to say. The only issue would have been. I'm sure it wasn't a big print run. But it's one of those things. Maybe if your comic shop has preset bundles, it's the kind of thing that would probably be more likely in like a preset bundle, because it's Jonathan Hickman and they put those together versus like separate loose issues in a back bin.
I would, and that's how I bought Manhattan Projects.
Yeah, I'd be more. I feel more reliable that it would be in that sort of situation at a comic shop than finding all the issues just loosely in a long box or somewhere. But the trades, the collections are definitely available, and they're also available. So your library will have it, if whether it's a physical copy or through like Hoopla or Libby or something like that. It's out there to be read, and I think it has more eyes on it now because in the last 10, 12 years, Hickman as a writer in comics and the medium is a far bigger name now. So the issues aren't going to be reprinted, but the trades collections definitely are. So his increased visibility helps increase all of his books' visibility. So it's out there. You can find it.
For sure. So with that in mind, go to your shop, go to your library, go wherever you go. Get a copy of this and meet us back here next Thursday for a deep dive discussion into the nightly news by Jonathan Hickman with the help of Jonathan Hickman, and also assisting with the art was Jonathan Hickman. See you next week.
Peace.